and welcome to Tar Heel History, episode 5. Today we're going to make pitch, and we're going to show you how to do it, what it was used for. We appreciate you subscribing to the channel if you will, so you can keep up with us as we go through going into turpentine next. And we're very thankful that you take the time to watch this, and welcome to North Carolina. Okay, today we're going to recap. We're going to make pitch today, but we're going to recap what we've talked about. Okay, now they built a mound, dug out 20 to 30 foot across, down sloping ground, put in clay in the bottom of that mound in a V ditch. Sometimes they would put a hollow log in the bottom of that mound going out to that barrel that was buried in the ground. And that 32-gallon barrel buried in the ground is where your tar is going to run after you pile this mound full of this tree heart, fat lightered pine tree heart, and you go up and you put green pine limbs on top of the wood so it can't burn through. The next thing you're going to do is pile dirt on top of it until you have a mound similar to this. You're going up top, you're going to set fire to it, and as it starts burning down in that mound, you throw dirt over there to cover the flames. No flames could show through. 2 days to dig it, 2 days to load it, 2 days to cover it up, and now you're going to spend 9 to 12 days watching this mound, okay, as it puts out tar. After the second or third day, you're going to wind up with 100 32-gallon barrels of tar and charcoal. Now, today we'll talk a little bit about who did the work, how they did it. For this 9 to 12 days, this is 24 hours a day. It's like watching an oven cook, okay? You have to feed it air, okay? And so you're gonna lay hands on it. When you got a cold spot, you're going to take a pipe like this, a short pipe stick, and shove it in there and give it air. That'll draw your flames this way. It'll pull the fire to the air and feed that mound. Same way, all the way around this thing. Now, that is if it's getting to burn too cool, you have to give it air to keep the fire going inside this mound. If it gets too hot in there, it will burn up your tar, set fire to it, and destroy your mound. It'll catch on fire, and that air going to that fire will cause the mound to collapse, okay? So, you give it air, pull the fire this way. If you feel another cold spot, you do the same thing all the way around the mound, okay? This mound gets too hot, and you're getting black plumes of smoke that your tar is burning up. You had to come up here and shut down the air, okay, all the way around it. Now, sometimes these mounds would be burnt enough inside that when you go up there and stomp that, or when they did, the mound would collapse, and of course the man could fall down in the mound and get burned up, killed. Okay, it's very dangerous work. The other thing is, if it gets too cool in there and builds up pressure, that mound could explode out the side. And so we get done 9 to 12 days later. We've cooked off our tar. We've got our 100 barrels full, 80 barrels, 90 up to 100 barrels out of this mound. We have put out the fire. We've got our charcoal. It's what we've actually made in the mound. But in these mounds, you're talking about several hundred bushels of charcoal that they got out of the mound, okay? They would just haul it back to the farms, use it in the blacksmith shops, And the blacksmiths loved it. They still do today, love our charcoal that we make in our pots. It's very good charcoal, okay? And I'll show you some other uses for it in a little bit as we're making pitch. But this charcoal, okay? Now, back to the shoes again. While they're working around these mounds for 9 to 12 days, their clothes, their shoes, every part of them is covered in tar and pitch. And they can't help it. It's just part of working around these mounds at night. It went on 24 hours a day. You couldn't see it. You stepped in it. It helped form the nickname Tar Heel, which in just a few minutes, we're going to talk about where that nickname came from, okay? But this is the origin. This is the reason, okay, right here. Now today, I changed hats, okay? The reason being, we're going to start talking about who did this work. And of course, in the very earliest of 1705 on until about 1770 or 80, it was mainly indentured servants. It was mainly the low-life people from England who had, you know, you had classes over there. It wasn't the rich men out here doing this. It was the common working man. And that common working man went right on into the 1800s. And basically, we need to get this out because they've been forgotten about. They were just, a lot of them, just poor people who lived in these woods. They actually lived in the woods in lean-tos and small log cabins. They didn't have matches. They didn't have big plantations. They didn't own slaves. They were just common men working in the woods. And so as time went on, North Carolina later on was called the Rip Van Winkle State because basically no industry, nothing changed. A lot of these guys, their children were the same way. They owned nothing, didn't even own a home. They lived in the woods, in the pine woods where they worked most of the time, slept there, hunted and fished for a living. They wouldn't work very much at the time anyway because they said most of the time they were hunting and fishing. They only worked long enough to make enough money to buy their clothes, supplies, shoes and stuff, and then you couldn't find them again. They went hunting and fishing again. So they were kind of a low-life, thought of back then, a low-life type person who didn't have any ambitions to build, you know, a huge farm or own land or anything. They just thought of them as low-lifes. And they worked in these woods, and these mounds were done in the wintertime. And by the way, the official name for these were tar kilns, K-I-L-N. It was a tar kiln. It was actually a charcoal kiln that put out tar. Now, down east of here, they slurred that together and started calling them tarkles. That means tar kiln, okay? But in the little further east than us down here, that word appeared tarkle mounds, okay? So if you hear people talking about tarkles, they were talking about tar mounds. If you hear them talk about tar kilns, they were talking about tar mounds. Same exact thing, sweating out tar, they called it, because of the heat, heating the wood, opening the pores, and then the tar running out. Sweating tar is the term they used. Now, the tar, when it comes out of that mound as a liquid, is cool to the touch. It's not hot. So you wouldn't get burnt by the liquid, by the tar, but it would get all over you, okay? Time progresses in North Carolina, but these men, later on you have slave owners who were mainly the rich and the politicians who backed the rich, okay, and needed their money. Same way as today and every day they existed. Those men, about 20% ever owned one slave. So the rest of them, the 80%, were mainly just common working men who lived in these woods and did tar, pitch, and we're fixing to go into turpentine after today. So tar, pitch, and turpentine is what they did for a living, and they were known as low grade, like I'm saying, by society, by the plantation owners and everybody else that had money. They were known as low grade people who lived in the woods. And between Virginia and South Carolina, who had a lot of plantation owners, they North Carolina men got a derogatory term applied to them of tar burners or tar boilers. And during the Civil War, when those guys volunteered to serve their state, back then your state was your country, because each state was what it says, a state. It was a country. Your governor was your president, more or less. And when they called up the men out of these woods to come and serve the state of North Carolina and protect it from invasion, they left and went up there, and of course, maybe owned 2 pair of pants, a pair of shoes or 2, and a shirt. So the way you went dirty till you got you a uniform. And during the Civil War, the men from Virginia and South Carolina made fun of the North Carolina boys who lived in these woods and did all this physical work themselves in the tar and pitch and turpentine. They made fun of them and called them tar boilers, tar burners, and that stuck and was derogatory until the battles started happening. And what they found was these boys who lived in the woods and worked for a living and were strong and this, that, and other, when everybody else was running during the war, these men were standing in a line of battle, they said, as if they still had tar on their heels, helping them stick to the ground in battle. And so during the Civil War, North Carolinians turned that derogatory term into a badge of honor. And so after the war, we don't know of this being written down anywhere until like 1862, but they were praising these North Carolina men because they stuck and didn't run. And so after the war, when they came home, they brought the term with them, and we became known as the Tar Heel State. But it came from these tar mounds from 1705 at the beginning of the state with our first town of Bath, all the way up to the Civil War. We were treated as a backwoods country in North Carolina that nothing was progressing. Rip Van Winkle State, they called us, asleep. Nobody doing anything to progress past tar, pitch, and turpentine. So that's how we became known as Tar Heels. And then in the late 1800s, when UNC was forming their football teams, like everybody else in the nation, that began in schools, and when they formed their newspaper known as the Tar Heel, and then their ball teams, they were trying to think of the most intimidating nickname. When you do a ball team, you want a nickname that's intimidating, like a lion or and so the most intimidating thing they could think of was their veterans, their soldiers. They had given so many from the school that had gone and fought, left college and went and served our state and our governor or our president. And basically most of those guys agreed on the board that the only nickname available that would be perfect was the Tar Heels. There's an old saying in the South that even came down to like our grandparents, that Virginia had so many plantations, South Carolina had so many plantations, that one of the reasons they made fun of the North Carolina boys that lived in these woods and had nothing, they called North Carolina in the south, a valley of humility between two mountains of conceit. And the reason for that, like I say, was because they called us a Rip Van Winkle state, because we didn't have a lot of those cotton plantations, and most of the work was done in the pine woods. And so therefore, that's how that nickname Tar Heel originated. Now, pitch was also used on the decks of the ships on top, where they boarded together, but not like this on the sides. This was the side of the ship, but on top of the floor up there, you had to water seal it also, because water come over the side and you didn't want it going down in your cargo. And so you would also put your, your oakum in here and tighten it up, and then come back and not this much out of the crack because you get on your feet, but just right down the middle of the crack, you would put this layer of pitch, and then they would bring a hot iron pot or ball up here that been in a fire and drag it down these seams, which would melt this pitch into the seam where it could be cleaned off and painted. And that sealed the deck of the ship also. Okay, we're gonna make pitch. One thing we do with this charcoal that we're getting out of the pot after making tar, and what they got out of the mounds for making the big mounds of tar, kilns, if you see that charcoal can be powdered. And then you put some of it in your pot. And what we want to make is a fine powder, as you can see, okay, out of the charcoal. That's going in our pitch, okay? Okay, making pitch. We've got our pot, but in the beginning, they didn't have a pot. They just, when they got the tar out of the mound, they dig a big hole in the ground, deep, 3 or 4 feet deep, pour their tar in the hole, and set fire to it. They didn't have these torches, but this is a modern day piece of equipment that helps us get going quickly. Now we've started it with tree heart, fat lighter tree heart. The same thing that's making the tar we're using to start our fires, okay? And you can see how fast it catches fire. Okay, this is the tar we made in the last episode, okay? This is tar. You can hear it bubbling because it's got more turpentine in it than the old pitch. What you're going to do to this now, this new tar, is we're going to add horse manure. Charcoal that we took out of the mound and crushed up. you can see this pitch as it's cooking. It's boiling and bubbling, and that bubbling is the turpentine cooking off of it and out of it. And the perfect pitch recipe that I found from the 1800s was exactly 1/2 the weight of the tar. It took 2 barrels of pine tar cooked down like this to make 1 barrel of pitch. And that's why nobody wanted to do it, because you were cutting your profits in half. But the king said if you were going to sell him tar, half your runoff had to be made into pitch. Horse manure, charcoal, tar, cooked down. You see it bubbling. That is the turpentine cooking out of the tar. 1/2 of the tar made perfect pitch. Now, while they were cooking pitch, either in the ground or in a pot, they took their fence post, dipped their fence post in it, which was our first wood treatment against termites in the ground. Okay, now when this cools off, I'll show you it turns to a solid when it cools off, okay? This pitch has cooled off just a little bit. It's like bed liner in a pickup truck, so it won't get on you. But yet it makes a barrier on this wood to termites, water, anything else, rot. And so by dipping their fence post in it, putting them in the ground, you're sealing it off from bugs and moisture, keeping it from rotting off in the ground. Something very important, if you ever try this, and this will catch fire. We have had this pitch pot catch fire and blaze 4 foot in the air. Do not spray water on it. If you spray water on this as an oil, it will bounce right back up in your face and cover you and burn you up. The way you stop a pitch fire is like this. By covering and cutting the air to it, will put the fire out. But do not throw or spray water on tar pitch or turpentine fires. One other thing that when I was growing up was a common thing to use fat lighter tree heart for was to find a knot in the woods and use that knot in the fields planting by cutting a hole so it's something else we use fat lighter tree heart knots for. This concludes episode 5. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you will, go up there. I make tar and pitch. I don't know computers, but they say that you can subscribe to the channel and that you can click like buttons and this and that and the others. It helps us move this thing along, but we appreciate it. See you next time in North Carolina.